Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Trudy LPC, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Self-Advocacy Podcast. So today, guys, we are going to be talking about a really hot topic these days. We are going to dive deep and we are going to talk about the B word. Yes, I said it, boundaries. I have with me today, Gavie Remaly. She is here and she's going to talk about her personal journey of being able to learn to overcome boundaries. And now she uses her skill set and the things that she went through in order for her to be able to help other people navigate boundaries. So she is a self-proclaimed and certified boundary boss. She's also the podcast host of the Blissfully Bold Podcast. She also has a free guide that she's going to share with you guys. So make sure you guys stay tuned so you can learn more about that as well. But I am really, really excited to have her here and to talk with her today. So without further ado, please welcome to the Self-Advocacy Podcast, Gavie Remaly. Hey, Gavie, how you doing today,
Hey,
girl? Thank
you. That was such an amazing intro. I'm like excited to listen to this episode and I'm the one talking about it. And I'm like, what am I going to say?
Well, we're about to find out then. So I really appreciate your time today, but we can go ahead and just dive on in and have you tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, you gave a pretty good intro. I'm Gavie Remaly, and I guess I am a self-proclaimed boundary boss, but I won't go without saying that it is everyday work. And so just because you think that, you're pretty set in your boundaries, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have upkeep to it. So I'm just going to leave that for later. I will touch back again. But for me, I am a podcast host, as you mentioned. My podcast is actually releasing in mid-June. So I'm getting out there, getting my name, and also all this information, because it is information that people should know about boundaries, because boundaries are crucial to your well-being. Crucial. And so that is just a message that I want to spread to everyone. I do have a free guide that I'll also mention towards the end. And later this summer, I will be doing a webinar for learning to kind of implement your boundaries whenever like school season starts up again, and for working parents.
Nice.
So,
Okay, so you covering all bases. I was checking out your press kit, and I noticed that you do work a lot with like work-life balance and other life transitions and things, being able to enforce those boundaries in there. But I'm intrigued to know a little bit more about what got you to this place. Like, what was going on that made you want to start implementing boundaries, and what was going on in your life that even made that become a thing for you?
Right. Absolutely. So, I'm going to set the scene. It was 2020 when the world was already crumbling, right?
Of course.
This is like the major transition for everyone in their life, I feel like. And it was such a turning point. And it wasn't just because of the pandemic that I kind of felt this. I was a new mom. My daughter was about 18 months. And so at the time I was working in the oil and gas industry. And if you know anything about that industry, it's pretty demanding. There's a lot of time that you need to put in, work hours, things like that. And so I just found it difficult to find the balance of being the working go-getter in being the mom. Like, I take pride in all the work that I do. I want to make sure that I'm doing it right, because perfectionism is a thing too, right? That's like a whole other topic. And that's what also like kind of prevents you from like holding a boundary of like, I can do it. And you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing yourself because you want to be a perfectionist, and then your boundaries just kind of fall to the wayside. And so that was kind of the space that I was in. I was struggling with being a new mom and balancing the time at work and this demanding job, and balancing the time at home, being with my daughter. And then, wanting to still do well while working. And so I'm like trying to give my all in two places. And it's honestly like a moment of burnout.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's hard to say that it wasn't something that just built and built and built and built up. And so by the end, I was just feeling bitter and angry all the time at work. Like, when you vent to coworkers and it's like, there's a point of where something is venting because you kind of like bond and feel good about it. But then there's the other point of where like, I just fucking hate this shit and I'm so over it. And yeah, I was at that point of where I'm just over this. And so that kind of made me spiral into this really dark depression. And maybe it was, part hormonal because at the time I was nursing and I had just weaned from nursing. So it could have been hormonal, but it also was because I was so overwhelmed with all the things. And so in like my depression, I just describe it as being in this really dense fog covered lake. And it was just dark all around me. And so I couldn't see in any direction of what I needed to do to pull myself out of it and just find joy again in life. Like, and to the point of where, I was kind of having intrusive thoughts. And I don't think that a lot of people want to admit that. That's really something scary to admit.
Right.
And so it shouldn't take you to getting to that point to realize like, shit, like something's got to give.
Right.
Like, something has to change. Like, it's not okay for me to have these kinds of thoughts, much less feel so bitter all the time in my life.
Yeah.
And so I did that by paying more attention. I got a happiness coach. I equate her to being a life coach, to be honest.
Okay.
But she called herself the happiness coach. And at first I was kind of like, I don't know, because really I was at the point, like I said, I was depressed. And so I knew that I needed help at this point. Like I needed help, but I didn't want to go to a psychiatrist per se, or anyone that could prescribe medication, because I feel like in the America that we live in today, I feel like it's still a pretty like prominent option for people when they're depressed. It's like, oh, like, we're going to go see the therapist, and then also that they put you on medication sometimes. And I know that's not the route for everyone, but that's just the idea that I had in my head at the time. And so I did not want to be on medication, just for a multitude of reasons. Like I don't even, like, this probably sounds crazy and maybe it's a TMI, but like, I don't even take birth control, or I didn't at the time, because I just didn't want to take any medication. Gotcha. I just felt like, one, it's hard to remember to do those things. And then I just wanted to go more natural route. And so I found the happiness coach, and I was telling her about, what was happening in my life and that I didn't want to be on medication. She's like, well, I don't prescribe anything. Like I can't. And I'm like, well, that's fine because I don't want to be. Yeah. And so with her help, and kind of her exercises of, having me be more self-aware and like basically kind of like a journaling, but she didn't have me journal. I journaled on my own because it just felt good to vent, on paper. And I know that when people think about journaling, that they think like it's this whole like formal session maybe where it's like I have to get out my journal and I have to spend 30 minutes and I have to like meditate and whatever else they think goes on in journaling. And at this point, I was doing it at work whenever I would get pissed because, something was happening at work that I didn't like. And instead of venting to my coworkers, I would just write it down. And I would be brutally honest. Like, I don't know how many curse words are written in my journal. Like I was just like, F this and I hate this. And but like I was really like the kind of person that most people don't want to be around because they're just so negative, Yeah. And so I journaled all that. And looking back at it now, yeah, it was hard to read during the time. But now I'm really grateful that I journaled because I know where I came from. Right. I know what it takes to have the hard things to look at and decide, do I want to stay here? Or do I want to be scared and move out of it? Because I was really scared to tell my employers, like, hey, I need this. Like, I need less hours. When everyone else in the company is working their ass off. Yeah. And it made me feel like the whole reason that I kind of didn't go that direction, or I was scared to go in that direction, was because it made me think, like, who am I to ask for special treatment, basically? But at the same time, it's like, I was just pushing down my needs.
Yeah. But it's not even really special treatment. It's work-life balance. Like, none of you guys should have been working that many hours. If it's as many as I'm thinking it was, like, that's just not something, any employer should be having people do, because it's not good for your mental wellness or your mental health. But I did want to say this, just for you and for those that are listening, because I'm all here for life coaches. I'm a therapist that does not have a bone to pick with life coaches. However, you can go to a therapist and we don't prescribe medications, because we can't either. We do talk therapy and we do different therapeutic modalities, but we don't prescribe medications. That's more of a psychiatrist than what a therapist would do. So just for those that listening, I mean, I love life coaches. I love what they do, because it's not enough of us, and there's a lot more of them, I feel like, out there. But I just don't want people to kind of steer away from the idea of therapy because they may think that, we're pushing medication, because I believe in the medical model, and sometimes people do need medication, but I also am a strong advocate of just doing talk therapy and different modalities for that. But I'm glad that you found a happy coach and they were able to help you navigate through finding that happiness. What role did the boundaries play in you getting to your happy place?
Oh, man. Okay. So this is the question of, how are boundaries the fundamental aspect to your complete well-being and happiness, right? Like, to hold a boundary, okay, say, for example, work-life balance, right? It's a boundary that you're holding with your employer to let them know, hey, I'm stretched thin.
Yeah.
And I can't work at the capacity that you would like me to, because I am unhappy because I am so stretched thin. And so the boundaries just lead to happiness in every aspect of your life, whether it's work-life balance or, dealing with family kind of issues or traditions or things like that. Like, I'm also in a place right now where I am realizing that the way that, my parents parented or my family is, that's not the way that I want to raise my children. And not to say that I don't love my family. I do. I love being around them. I love having, their company and all that. It's just that I don't necessarily believe in the way of raising kids that they did. And it's because, they did what they knew. And I feel like that's what a lot of people kind of are thinking these days. I actually just listened to a podcast that you had done. I forgot who the speaker was, but she was talking about, you can still love your family, but, you can also understand and be aware of how it makes you feel in certain situations when you're around them, and wanting to just, go in a different direction. And that's not bad. And so I think that, if you're putting yourself in those situations that make you feel like you're different, or that you're sad, or that you're angry about something, you need to look at yourself and identify, what's the boundary that I need to hold with myself and with other people that is going to help me find more joy in my life and not feel like I am just accommodating or people pleasing, for a buzzword.
Yeah. I mean, that's so true. I feel like boundaries are just, I do feel like they're our lifeline, because we're taught from very young ages that, we should do this or we should do that. We should work hard. We should, go to school. We should do that. And that's not everybody's story, but it's also like we praise this culture of, I worked 50 hours last week. I did 60. And it's kind of like, why are we bragging about overworking ourselves when truly we need time? We need those self-care days. I work with so many clients where I'm like, you have unlimited PTO, right? And they don't take off because they feel like, it's a trick or it's a scam. And it's like, maybe it is. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's there. Use it. And a lot of people are afraid to kind of set those boundaries and say, I'm not working over 40 hours a week, or I'm not working over this amount of time. And I feel like that's something that a lot of us get stuck with. But when it comes to those relationships, I know that your story seems like it's more around like the work stuff. But did you have to set some boundaries personally in your life that were difficult to navigate through?
It was mostly with work stuff, but I had to set that boundary for myself to understand that my worth wasn't dependent on how much work I put in.
Yeah.
Like you have to understand those things fundamentally for yourself, which I am going to be talking about that on my podcast, is like having boundaries, not necessarily with other people, because I think it's easy to point a finger at someone and say like, I need boundaries with you, or I need boundaries here because you make me feel this way. And it's like, well, you have to be aware of yourself also to understand like, why am I feeling this way? And then also address those feelings of, well, why do I feel that way? Like you had mentioned earlier about, like not all therapy is, prescribing medication. And that was just some kind of limiting belief that I did have. Like now I understand like, oh, you don't need to go those avenues, and like that not everyone is going to try to prescribe you medication. And I just had in my mind that, that's what it was. And so when you don't understand or know those things, it's hard to pin a point on what particularly needs to change and have a boundary set up. And so I think that that's something that, people can be more aware of. And especially like say with work-life balance and holding a boundary with your employer. Your employer doesn't know most of the time if you're unhappy in something, if you don't say anything.
Right.
Like I tell my daughter all the time, I say, no one knows what you're feeling unless you say it out loud. Can't expect people just to know what you need. And so it's up to you to speak vocally, audibly of what you need. And so I'm not going to say that all employers, that they're doing this because they don't know, because that's not the case either. And at that point, it's a culture kind of issue or situation that needs to be addressed within the company. I think that at that point, if it is a culture within the company, you need to decide, is this somewhere where I want to stay? Or is it somewhere where I want to take a leap and go? And that's scary too.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of us have to ask ourselves that question, if you are at an agency that doesn't really respect work-life balance. And I feel like a lot more like, millennials and Gen Z, like I feel like a lot more people in that population are not really like staying stuck. More so Gen Z, because they just don't, they're not doing it. And it is one of those things that I love about that generation, because it's kind of like they're not going to stand for the status quo of like, this is how it's been. And so I'm just going to stick around. Like they're applying for new jobs. They're not staying at jobs for 10, 20, 30 years. And that's good, because if they are not accepting these things, eventually more companies are going to have to change, and more companies are going to have to offer more work-life balance. But I know some are just antiquated and they're just going to do what it is that they choose to do. And I hate to see how they're going to look in another 20, 30 years, because these new generations are definitely not with it. But I did want to kind of shift and talk a little bit more about the personal side, because sometimes it's work, sometimes it is personal. And I find that a lot of clients do struggle with setting personal boundaries. For me, I learned to set boundaries in my 20s, because I learned that if you tell people that you're off of work on certain days, then they feel like that your time is their time. That's your time now becomes their time for them to go run errands or you to do things for them. And there are a lot of people that like feel really connected to their family the way that you do, and they feel stuck in that. So why do you think it is that so many people struggle with holding boundaries, setting them or holding them? What do you see as one of the most common reasons why they do that?
Because they're unaware. Okay. So they're either unaware of that feeling not being the norm. I feel like, when you grow up in a certain environment or in a certain way, it's normal. Everyone around you is like, oh, like you said, like you mentioned, like I'm off now, like your family, like say you're close to your family, right? So they know you're off and they're like, oh, you're off. Like, let's go do XYZ. Let's go have this party. Like, go with me to go shopping for this, this, and this. And you're kind of like, I just want to chill and relax and watch Netflix. Guilt, I think, is probably like right up there with the fear of rejection or the fear of, just coming off as being confrontational. I think that, fear in general holds people back a lot for putting in their boundaries. So first you have to be aware that there should be a boundary there. Cause some people are like, oh, that's not a boundary. Like, that's just normal. It's like, no, like you have a choice.
Right.
And two, like they're scared once they understand like, oh, it's on me. Like I need to tell them that I will or will not do something, whatever it is that it may be. And they get scared. Like I said earlier, I was really scared to tell my employer that I needed quote unquote special treatment. And I know now that was not special treatment. That was an actual need of rest.
Right.
That was like necessary for me. And I held off for so long because I was so scared, like, oh, they're going to fire me. I hear that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
People being scared, like, oh, I can't say that to my job because they're going to fire me. Like, I'm so replaceable. And it's like, yeah, you're like, sure, that's a valid point. You are replaceable.
Right.
But also, like, they would not have had you, like, in the instance of long-term employment, like if you've been an employee there for 2 years, 3 years or longer, like they are especially not going to let you go because one, hiring people is expensive and a pain in the ass.
Right.
Like you have to find qualified people. And two, like they're not just going to disregard all of the good like work that you've put in because you need something in this instance. Like, is this situation going to be forever? Do you just need it right now? You decide that. Yeah. And that's something I think that people can also evaluate when they're journaling. I really recommend journaling. And like I said, it doesn't have to be this long drawn out thing. Like literally just get out a notebook and be like, I'm pissed off because blah, 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 or whatever is making you angry or happy or sad or whatever it is that you're feeling. Like just jot it down in like less than like 2 sentences and move on with your day. And one, it's like a brain dump basically. Right.
Yeah.
And two, it's like a method of being able to get out your feelings and not have to hold them in. So.
Yeah. A lot of people struggle with journaling because they do feel like it has to be this big formal process. Like you wouldn't imagine how many times I tell a client, hey, I want you to try journaling. They're like, how? And I'm just like, damn it, just write some shit on the paper. Like it's not that fucking deep, but I can't say that to clients. But that's what I'm sometimes thinking.
You just did.
Like, that's what I'm sometimes thinking because it's like, it doesn't have to be 10 minutes. It could be 2 damn minutes. Just get it out. Like don't hold on to it or whatever. Yes, I had a very interesting session earlier with the same conversation, but nevertheless, I do think that that's really important, but I am curious, what other tips would you kind of give to someone who is maybe just now starting out their boundary journey?
Absolutely. So when you don't have internal courage, you need to seek external courage. And for me, that was in the form, and this is really embarrassing for me to admit, but at this point I'm like, that was 4 years ago and I'm not even the same person. But I listened to this song called Brave by Sarah Bareilles or something like that. And it just seems like a very typical, stereotypical kind of song because it's basically telling you to be brave, right? And it's, I remember the day that I told I had already emailed my managers and let them know. And it was the day of the meeting that I was going to ask them to, cut my hours back essentially. And I played it all day because I needed the external courage, like the external, oomph to pump me up. And so I would say that's the biggest thing is that, you don't have to be necessarily confident in saying what your boundaries are because you are scared. you know, most of the time for people who are new to this space. Like it's really hard to not be the people pleaser when you've been a people pleaser your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's basically a new identity.
Yeah. I get it. I created a whole identity of, you know, this new version of myself that doesn't do what other people want me to do. And, you know, the scary part of it is that you then sometimes get labeled as a bitch, or you get labeled as just rude or mean. And you have to be okay with that, too, because people aren't going to like you telling them no. But no is definitely a complete sentence. It does not need explanation. And when you put boundaries in place, it is just one of those things where people will learn to deal with it and accept it. But you're going to get pushback and resistance on the front end. So it is important, you know, to know that, you know, especially with your family. Now, with work, it may look a little bit different or whatever, because with work, you have different laws that protect you, whether you implement those things or not. You have things like reasonable accommodations, and you have things like the Family Medical Leave Act and things like that to make sure that you take care of yourself. And so if you're listening and you're in those corporate settings where you feel like you don't have any safeguards, legally you do. From a federal standpoint, you absolutely do. So I definitely want people to take advantage of those things that they need it.
Exactly. And I actually have a story about the FMLA thing. Is I was in the same company and, I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was trying to get my maternity leave kind of set up. And they're like, oh, you're going to take 6 weeks, right? And I was like, no, not taking 6 weeks. And I had already looked into FMLA, and it's a pretty big company. And so I knew that those laws applied.
Right.
And so I told them, I said, I'm taking the 12 weeks, the FMLA. And I thought you were going to take 6. It's like, no, and before they could even say no, I was like, I looked up FMLA and blah, 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 whatever it said in FMLA. Yeah. So I'm please don't try to fucking bullshit me about what I can and can't do. That's another thing about, knowing your rights, right? Whenever you're going to stand up to someone, in this particular instance, an employer, if there are legal aspects to it, make sure you know those before you kind of have the confrontation that people, kind of build up in their head. Before you have the conversation with whoever it is that you're having it with, your employer or whatever other legal kind of aspect to it that you're doing, make sure that you are informed. For sure. I think that having all of that information at your fingertips, or already knowing it, that gives you more power to understand and know that what you're asking for is not wrong. Right. It's just, this is what you need. And if it wasn't something that was important, I don't even think that there would be a law around it. Especially when it comes to having maternal leave. I don't know. That's a whole other issue in this country.
Any type of illness, any type of, things like anxiety disorder, things like major depressive disorder, those are things that are protected issues. And if you, say you are seeing a psychiatrist or you are seeing a therapist and you're just burned out to the point that you're not able to function, there are so many options out there. So I definitely would encourage people to look into what is applicable to their company. I think most FMLA, for most jobs, FMLA allots, I think 480 hours a year towards FMLA if you need to be out. And that's paid or unpaid, depending on what your company, how they have it set up. But either way, you do have those options. But I do want to kind of shift gears a bit and pose to you the question of the day, and just check in to see, how do you personally connect with the idea of being self-aware and fucked up?
Okay. So once you're aware, it's hard to go back to being unaware. You can't just blissfully ignore something at this point, because you already know it's an issue. And I think that, with knowing that, you have to, once you're aware of a situation, you need to become more aware. You can be aware of this makes me unhappy, but then you dig deeper. Why does that make you unhappy?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, journaling. Everyone who's listening, if you didn't get the point, like journaling is very important. So for your clients too, like I know that people are like, oh, I don't want to journal. But also I think that, if you just want to use voice notes, that's good too. But yeah, so, once you're aware, you become more aware and you start asking yourself questions like, why do I feel this way? Like, what could I change? And I think that it's just, gradually kind of building up into a point of where do I want to be? If I don't want to feel like this, then what do I want to feel like? And when you journal, you become more aware of what brings you joy and what do you want to do more of?
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny that you asked me this question is because today I overextended myself, like 100%. I had an outing this morning with my daughter wearing Girl Scouts. I had already said that we were going to go do this. And so I had booked that. And then, I'm here with you. And there's a crawfish boil literally going on in the room, like next to me. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to make, I volunteered. I was like, I'm going to make this really great side to go, like with all the food and stuff. And I didn't wake up last night because I was so tired because I overextended myself, like doing all the things during the week of other, other kind of obligations that I have, like actual work and like taking care of kids. My kids are really young. They're 5 and 2.5. So they require a lot of attention. And so I was just tired and I didn't get to prep like I wanted to last night. I should have. But I didn't. So I was doing all that this morning. Like I went and bought all the ingredients and I was going to start making it. And then I realized I forgot something. And so all of that to say is that I put too much on my plate. And while I was in the car on the way over here, I was thinking like, okay, you did this to yourself. Like, I know that a lot of people say like, oh, I did this to myself and they're kind of kidding. But really, I think that you should take note of like, why, like, what could you eliminate next time? Or what did you not really have to do that you thought was so important?
Yeah.
But it really wasn't. And so that people, need to take note. And I say write it out because you can go back and look at it.
Yeah.
And you can understand, like, when you're feeling this way later, it's nice to go back and look at your old journals and say, like, what was I doing in this moment when I was feeling like this again? And then you can start to develop and see a pattern of what those behaviors are and what those situations are that make you just not feel great, make you feel like you're not in a space of, contentment, basically, and feeling like you're overwhelmed. I think that people can take note of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely can all relate to overbooking ourselves and being in a space where we, are trying to do everything and we don't set those boundaries with ourselves. And I think that that's definitely important to highlight. But Gavie, I so appreciate your time today and being able to have this conversation with you, even though you overbooked yourself for today. Really appreciate that. But how can people connect with you? How can they get this free guide that you spoke about earlier? Can you let the audience know a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I'm Gavie Remaly. You can find me on Instagram at gavie.remaly. I do have the guide linked. It's the Become a Boundary Boss guide, and you can sign up for that. And I did cover one of the little tips that I have in it from earlier. You were asking about, what are some ways that people can start implementing their boundaries when they're new to this space. One of them was the external courage, kind of pumping yourself up. I do have other tips that are in that resource. So make sure that you get it and it'll sign you up for the emails as well. And I will be dropping more information about my upcoming podcast, which will cover, more topics like this. And I'm super excited about it. But that is the main way to find me. You can also find me on Facebook, just Gavie Remaly. Gavie is Gav, like Victor, IE, and then Remaly, Remaly. So thank you for asking.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for sharing how people can connect with you. Guys, please make sure that you connect with Gavie. All of the information of how you can connect with her will be in the description of this episode, as well as how you can download her free guide so that you can also become a boundary boss. Also, make sure that you guys follow me, Tree the LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle Tree the LPC. Until next time, be safe, be well, and make sure that you take care of your mental health.